Well, tonight we're going to be discussing and studying a passage that is a little bit odd. It's a passage that, as I've studied in the past, I've come across and I've been like, "What is that about? What is that trying to say?" But I've enjoyed studying it this week, and I hope that as we study it together, you'll see the benefit of this passage and what we're going to be studying about. We've been working our way through a discussion about putting on the armor of God. And as I think about armor, I've never really worn armor before. The closest I've ever come was putting on Army outfit for the job that I had for about 6 months as a flight test engineer. I got to dress up like a soldier. And there was no armor in that outfit. There were a lot of pockets, but no armor. And I looked like a soldier. And it felt really weird because people were coming up to me saying, "Thank you for your service." And I felt like an imposter. I was like, that's not what this is, you know. Eventually, after I flew on an airplane and fell out of the sky a few times, I started saying, "Okay, you know what, this is service. It's okay. They can say thank you." But for the most part, you know, I didn't enter combat or anything like that. But wearing that outfit brought you to that reality of what it's like to be a soldier. It made you think a little bit more about the sacrifice that those men and women would make to go out and to serve our country. And it was a tremendous blessing to do that. And throughout the study, I hadn't really thought about that. You know, what piece of armor have I ever put on? You know, put on a belt, but it had nothing to do with armor, really. But shoes, as I come to shoes, I remember putting on those combat boots that they would give you. And I look at this picture that's on the screen right now that represents probably the kind of shoes that Roman soldiers would be wearing, and I think, that ain't what I was wearing, you know. That is a far cry from the combat boots that I wore, which were heavy and bulky and had tread about 5 times as thick as these sandals that you see on the screen. But this is a representation of the type of shoes that a soldier would wear as they would be going out in battle. Let's start by reading the verse. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 15, he says, "And as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace." And now you know why I said this is one of those texts that I was like, okay, what is that about? You know, this is a wordy text. The way it's worded, it just sounds kind of strange. Put on as shoes for your feet, the readiness that's given by the gospel. What does that mean, and what is this all about? Well, that's what I hope we'll get around to as we study together tonight. First of all, consider a soldier's shoes. How do shoes affect us? As we wear shoes to different events, for the most part, we've got a lot of shoes for different things, for different purposes. Some are for style only, and there's no comfort whatsoever in those shoes. And some are just about comfort. Some are about speed and the ability to move quickly. And so we think about the different shoes that we have, and we think about the shoes that a soldier might wear. We start thinking about different attributes that a soldier's shoes would be needing to have. It's not just go grab a pair of shoes out of the closet to wear to be a soldier. There's some consideration, some thought that would go into the design of a soldier's shoe. And so I had 4 ideas that, as I was thinking about shoes, that maybe in the design of a shoe would be important. And that is, first of all, traction. A soldier would need traction. You think about it, you're out there on the battlefield and you're doing hand-to-hand combat with somebody else. If you slip, that could be the end of you. If you slip and you fall down, you lose your footing. It's not going to go well for you. So traction would be really important. You would need shoes that didn't slip and slide out from underneath you. I remember in basketball having basketball shoes that the grip would wear out, and then I would have to lick my hand and rub it on the bottom of the shoe. And I look back and think about that and how gross that was. Now that I'm married to Jenna, and she definitely lets me know your shoes are the most filthy part of you. But I needed traction. I needed to move. I needed to be able to go where I wanted to go. I needed to be able to stop on a dime and change directions. And so traction is really important for a soldier's shoes. Also, I think about protection. There's a reason why the soldier's shoes are so thick nowadays, because it's attempting to give the soldier protection. Protection from the different ground that they're going to be stepping on. They have these thin sandal-like shoes. It might damage their feet as they're walking along. And if you think about it, if you're an enemy and you've got soldiers coming and you know it ahead of time, you could throw spikes down or something like that to cause damage to your enemy's feet. And imagine the devastation that would result in if those soldiers' feet are damaged. So there would need to be some protection in the soldier's shoe wear, and also comfort. You think about Alexander the Great, and his army's main ability was to move across the world at breakneck speeds, like no other army had ever done before. They needed comfortable shoes to march 20 miles a day, to conquer an enemy and surprise them without them knowing that you were coming. They needed comfortable shoes. Imagine if you didn't have comfortable shoes, it would be hard for you to keep going over time. Your shoes would affect your feet and cause you to be in pain a lot and lose a lot of motivation and desire to do the work that it is that you have gone to do. And now, like I said, my army boots were thick, they were heavy, and if I had to walk 20 miles a day, that might be kind of tough. It'd probably wear me out because they're extremely heavy. And so weight is another idea that I put in here. Lighter shoes allow for you to travel those long distances without being worn out. Lighter shoes allow for you to move quickly and be more agile. If you've got the big clunky boots on, you might be kind of sluggish and unable to move whenever the enemy is coming after you. And you might ask, why are you saying all these attributes of shoes? Like, why do we care about any of these things? Well, this will be kind of important as we consider trying to apply this text a little bit later on. And as we're thinking about shoes and the necessity of shoes, I wanted to impress upon you the importance of having good footwear if you're going to go out and fight. You don't want to wear high heels, ladies, if you're going to go out and fight in a battle. And guys probably wouldn't want to wear flip-flops if they're going to go out and fight in a battle. We need appropriate footwear. It is something that is essential for us as we march to different areas and as we fight in different battles. Well, we have learned about different pieces of armor thus far. We've learned about a belt, which was an odd piece of armor to talk about, but that belt was the belt of truth, and so that made sense. And then we've learned about the breastplate of righteousness, and that made sense, to put on truth, to put on righteousness. Well, what does he tell us the shoes represent? He says in verse 15 again, as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. He's telling us to put on readiness. What is that? We get the belt of truth, we get the breastplate of righteousness. What is readiness? How do you put on readiness? What does this mean? Well, as we've said, our shoe type really indicates what we're going to do. What kind of shoes do we need to have on as Christian soldiers? We need to have shoes on our feet that are shoes that are ready to go, to do the things that God has commanded us to do. Another kind of illustration, I guess I'm full of illustrations tonight. As I was thinking about this and talking to my children, one of the last things I tell them to do is put on your shoes. You're not ready to go unless you have your shoes on. And that also reminded me of my childhood whenever I'd wear my shoes all the time. I'd come into the house with my shoes on, and I wouldn't take them off until I was ready to hop in bed. And my mom would tell me, are you going somewhere? I'd say, no. Why are you asking that? Well, you got your shoes on. I just assume you're going somewhere. And another thing she would commonly say is, take your shoes off, stay a while. It's 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night, I'm watching TV or just hanging out, doing whatever. And she's like, what you got your shoes on for? Take your shoes off. And it's a picture, I think, that having shoes on indicate you're ready to go somewhere, do something. Having basketball shoes on and at 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to play basketball, right? Well, no. Then why do you have your shoes on? Well, I'm ready to, It's kind of that picture. So, to kind of connect these ideas and help us understand this a little bit better, God wants us to have our shoes on and be ready to go somewhere, to do something, to be ready for every opportunity. So we need to be thinking about, what is God wanting us ready to do? What type of readiness are we putting on? What are we making ourselves ready for, in other words? Well, notice he tells us, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. To try to understand this, we need to think a little bit about the last part of this sentence. He doesn't make this very clear and easy for us. We have to think about this a little bit. What kind of readiness do we need to have? How do we need to be ready? It's kind of like the righteousness question. Are we talking about the righteousness Christ gives us? Or are we talking about the righteousness that we're supposed to put on and do, like to be holy living people? Here the question is, well, there's lots of different things we could be ready for. What do we need to be ready to do? Well, then we need to ask ourselves the question, what readiness does the gospel of peace give us? And how do we put that on? That's what we need to know. So, to match the 4 different attributes that I had for shoes, I came up with 4 different things that we need to be ready for. First of all, we need to be ready for temptation. We need to be ready for temptation. And I connected that to the idea of traction. Think about the gospel. Think about how the gospel gives you a readiness to face temptations. How does the knowledge of God giving His only Son on a cross so that you and I could be saved from our sins, so that we could become children of God, so that we could enter into a relationship with God where we receive every spiritual blessing? Essentially, the first 3 chapters of Ephesians is the gospel. How does that information make us ready to face temptation? And do we see that even though we've got all this temptation and everything that's going on in our lives, the gospel has made us ready to face that temptation? As I think about temptation, I think about my sin and the falling short that I've had over the years, and still falling short today, and not doing everything that I'm supposed to do all the time. I think about the worst sins that I've ever committed. When I think about the gospel, that affects the way I think about those sins. It affects the way I think about the temptations that are facing me right now. And the gospel does give me traction. Sin in some ways seems like an unstoppable force. Something that's just going to run me right over. But the gospel, as my feet, as my shoes, makes me an immovable object. Helps me to stop the sin from taking over my life. It makes me ready for that temptation whenever it comes. Because I know that God loves me so much that He has forgiven me of every other time I have fallen to this sin. And that He would forgive me if I failed again. But I don't want to fail. Because I know how much He loves me. And so the gospel makes me ready to face temptations. You think about trials. The gospel makes us ready to face trials. It is our protection against trials. We're going to walk through some very sketchy places in life, going to go through some difficult times, some dangerous areas where Satan has set spikes up for our feet And we have a gospel as a barrier to prevent us from suffering a mortal blow, to prevent us from an injury that is too much to come back from, that stops us from doing the work, from being involved in the battle that we're supposed to be involved in. And so we're ready for the trials because of the gospel. It continually tells us, God is with you. God is with me. No matter what comes, God will be with me. And He will not allow me to be tempted or tried beyond what my own ability is without providing a means of escape. And so the gospel gives me that protection, that knowledge and understanding that even though I've got trials ahead of me, I'm ready for them. All the suffering and difficulty of my life in the future is just going to remind me of the suffering that my Lord went through for me. And remind me of how much He loves me and cares for me and is providing for me. The gospel also makes me ready to teach. And I related that to comfort. As we learn the gospel, we should be ready to teach it. The gospel makes us ready to teach the gospel. Learning about the forgiveness that we've received and the wrath that is to come on all mankind because of their sin, because we have crucified our Lord, it motivates us to go out and to share that information with others, knowing that those we love all around us are going to suffer and die, are going to die and then suffer for all eternity, is motivation for us to get out there and do the work. But do you feel comfortable sharing that information? The gospel should make us more comfortable with that. I think a lot of times, whenever we put our shoes on for the first time, they hurt a little bit. I know those combat boots were just horrible, had blisters and all that stuff. But after you wear them for a while, you wear them in, you get your foot pretty well molded to the shoe, and the shoe molded to your foot, and then you're ready to go. Well, a lot of times what happens is whenever we go out to share the gospel and teach the gospel, it's really uncomfortable. And there's a lot of pain and blisters. And we just think, these shoes don't fit right. This is not for me. I can't share the gospel. I can't do this. But the gospel tells us that we're made to do this. That this is our purpose in life. We're here to shine a light for the world to see God's glory. Satan wants us to stop. And he wants us to believe the initial discomfort means that it will always be uncomfortable and that we'll never be able to do this. We'll never be able to march long distances to defeat the foes that we face, to do the teaching of the difficult people that we're going to teach. It's just going to be too hard for us. But the truth is, all of us can invite someone to services. All of us can share what God has done for us and the gospel that we have received, that it's not hard. And the truth is, we're just planting and watering, and God is doing the increasing. It's not up to us and our abilities. So there's comfort in knowing that we don't have to be the very best teacher in the world in order to accomplish the purpose that God has given us, but that the gospel itself has the power to save all of those who are willing to listen. And God is working on their hearts to bring them to Himself. We just have to believe that. So the gospel makes us ready to teach the gospel. We need to believe that. And finally, the gospel makes us ready to love. And I attach that to wait. Loving other people can be the hardest thing that we will ever do. People are not easy to love. It can feel like a heavy burden to love other people. That's why all those around us have found a way to shut other people out whenever they don't want to love them anymore. And we live in a very individualistic kind of society because it's much easier to just cut somebody out than to deal with the burden of trying to love someone who has done something against us. But the gospel makes us ready to show that love. It makes it easier for us to love other people. Think about the good news of God's forgiveness. Doesn't it make it easier for us to forgive other people? To know that even though we don't deserve the grace that has been given to us, the forgiveness that has been made available to us. Also, the knowledge of God's blessing us with every spiritual blessing. I mean, that should make it easier for us to give blessings to other people. We might think, well, they don't deserve it. But the gospel reminds us how undeserving we are, how we are unworthy of all the spiritual blessings and the forgiveness that God has given to us. And that motivates us and makes it an easier thing for us to love the unlovable people all around us. The more we wonder how God could still love us after all we've done to Him and done against Him, the more we should be transformed to be the type of people who are ready to love just like He's loved us. If we're not focusing that much on the gospel and the truth about the forgiveness and love God's given us, then it's going to seem like a heavy burden, and we're not going to be ready to love people the way we ought to. But if we focus on that gospel, it does become much easier, and we're able to accomplish what God has given us to do. I could probably go on if I had more of a mind that I could come up with more stuff, but there's a lot of things that the gospel would make us ready to do. There's all kinds of work that God has given us to do. And the gospel, because God has given us this wonderful gift of Jesus, makes us ready to fight and do all the work that God has given us to do. And that's what Paul is ultimately talking about as he says all of this. And we could go to other texts as well. In John 13:35, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. It's this expectation that we would love one another. In 1 Peter, which we're going to study after Ephesians, it's all about the gospel changing the way we interact with other people so that we desire to share the gospel with them and so that we desire to love them and endure all the trials and all the temptations that we go through. It's all throughout the book of 1 Peter, so I'm looking forward to studying that together with you. But we need to be the type of people who are ready for this, ready to face every temptation, trial, opportunity to teach, and opportunity to love people who are difficult because of the gospel, because of what it has given to us. So that's going to be our theme next year. We're going to be focusing in on the gospel and making sure that it's ingrained in us so much that we're ready to do all the work that God has given us to do. But for tonight, are we ready? I want us to do an evaluation of ourselves. The gospel is supposed to have provided us with a readiness to do all these things that I've listed and many, many more. Have we put on this gospel of peace? God has made peace between us and Him, that He has established a relationship that we have with each other as His church. That gospel of peace, has it made us ready to do all that God has given us to do? And if not, why not? I think a lot of times we're getting deceived into thinking that we can focus on other things, and that's okay. We don't pay attention to the gospel that much. We pay attention to other things, doing some work and providing for our family and all these other things that are not really that important. One of the things that I think has been tremendously harmful to our hearts is the culture around us. Culture around us tells us we need to look deep inside to find what makes us the most happy. And we need to pursue that with all our heart. And if we find it, then we'll have the happiness that we're longing for. And that thing is your identity. That's the thing that you need above everything else. Another thing that's commonly taught is You just need to self-actualize. You need to come to this best version of yourself. And if you'll get to that best version of yourself, then you will accomplish what you're here for. You've accomplished your purpose. And so what we tend to do is spend all our time going after things that we're desiring, that are of this world, that are empty, that will leave us empty, and not spending our time focused on the gospel. We're standing on philosophies. We're standing on false gospels instead of standing on the one true gospel. The good news that Jesus has come to save us from our sins is cast aside so that we can focus in and stand on getting whatever it is that we're after. The crazy thing is, if we look inside to find what we want most and we pursue that with everything that we have, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't. Living in the U.S., we might get it. It won't fill us. As an example, I told you I got a lot of illustrations for some reason. I just went crazy with illustrations. If your purpose in life is a Lamborghini, and you think, if I can get this Lamborghini, then I will have accomplished succeeding in life. And you work really hard and you never get the Lamborghini. Did you really fail at life? Is that really what life was all about? That's what the world might tell you. You can substitute that for a million different things. A nice house, a family, whatever it is that the world tells you is your innermost desire, that is your pursuit in life. Once you get it, it'll break. Things will go wrong with it. You won't be able to afford to fix the Lamborghini. It's all just a house that's built on the sand. If you put it in self-actualization, if you make that your purpose in life, to become the best version of yourself, and then you're injured, well, what are you supposed to do now? You're a failure? It's all vain. It's all vanity. It's not really what we're supposed to be focusing in on. We're not ready to share the gospel. We're not ready to live the gospel. We're not ready to face temptations. We're not ready to face trials because we're focused on all these other things, because we've got other shoes on that are not the shoes that God has told us to put on that make us ready to serve Him. I'm as guilty as anybody. But we need to be focused in on the gospel of peace and the call that we have to serve God faithfully to the very end and whatever we can do. We need to stand on the identity that we are children of God, that we are living here on this earth for a very short period of time to serve Him and to lay up treasures in heaven for when this life is over. And that's why we love people when it's really hard. And that's why we teach people while it's not comfortable. And that's why we endure trials and we face temptation and we do what we're here to do. I hope that this has been helpful for you. It's been helpful for me to just think about, am I really ready for all the things that are coming to me? Am I really ready to face the spiritual battle that is coming tomorrow? And if I'm not ready, why not? Well, it's because my focus is not on the gospel. It's on fulfilling some inner desire I have, not a Lamborghini. You don't have to worry about that. But whatever it is, I'm focusing in on that when I should be focusing in on this. Like, you need your shoes on, ready to share the gospel, ready to do what the gospel calls you to do. That's my lesson for this week. I hope it's helpful for you as well. If you're here tonight and you've not put on Christ and received the grace that is offered in this wonderful gospel, we want to help you in any way we can. Please come forward as we stand and as we sing.